Thank you, Sheriff. Y'all may be seated. Mr. Snipe, call your next witness.
Call Dr. Philip Hayden.
Sir, if you would, please, before you have a seat, just get raise your right hand. Swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth. Please have a seat. Any final questions for Mr. Snipes? And perhaps also Mr. Lane. You may proceed with record.
Thank you, Judge. Please state your full name for the record, spell your first and last name.
Philip Hayden, first name Philip, 1 Philip, last name Hayden, Hayden. Sound like you made an adjustment here.
Are you currently employed, sir?
Yes, I'm self-employed.
Okay. What do you do?
I have two companies. One's called Corporate Global Solutions, which is an investigative company, and the other is Phil Hayden Associates, which I do expert witness work and consultant work.
And are you a use of force expert?
Yes,
Is that what you're here to testify about today?
that's correct.
And where is your office, sir?
My office is in Fredericksburg, Virginia area.
And that's a suburb of D.C., basically, right?
Basically, it is, yes.
And let me take you back and ask you first, do you have any military experience?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
I went into the military in 1964 as a private, went through infantry training, was later commissioned in the infantry branch, and then went to Vietnam and served in Vietnam for 6 months, and then back in the hospital for 1.5 years, and then I was discharged.
Okay. So my recollection is that the Vietnam tours in the 60s were a year.
That's correct.
So how come you left after 6 months?
Well, after I was shot the third time put me in the hospital for 1.5 years. I was hit about 13 times.
What was your duty position in Vietnam, sir?
I was considered a platoon leader with Alert Patrol with the 173rd Airborne.
Okay. What is Alert Patrol?
A long-range patrol, I was the executive officer with that as a platoon leader.
And do you have, are you airborne?
Yes, I was.
Ranger?
Yes.
Pathfinder?
Yes.
Jungle and sniper?
Yes.
All infantry type training?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you receive any awards while you were in Vietnam?
Yes, I did.
You said you were wounded several times. You get a Purple Heart?
Yes, I did.
Did you receive this Distinguished Service Cross?
Yes, I did.
And is that the second highest award that you can get as a soldier for this great country?
Yes, it is.
Right below the Medal of Honor?
That's correct.
When did you leave Vietnam?
Well, I was hit February 1st, 1967. It took them about 6 weeks to get me out of Vietnam, stabilized enough to where I was sent to Japan. Spent about 3 months in Japan, then back to the Navy base in a hospital in New York.
Thank you for your service, sir. But, so you finished your military service, I take it then, right?
That's correct.
Was that the end of your public service to this country?
No, it was not.
What happened after that?
After I got out of the Army, I was trying to find what I could do for work, and found out without a college degree it really didn't help, so I went back to school and got my bachelor's degree. And at the end, my last year, the last semester, I was recruited by the FBI, and I did all the applications to everything I had to do when I was came into the FBI.
And the FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Oh, that's correct, yes.
And what were your duties there, sir, initially?
Initially, after I finished Quantico training, I went to Chicago and I worked criminal matters, theft from in-state shipment, bank robberies, and some foreign counterintelligence work.
Okay. Theft from interstate shipment, ITSP.
Yes, that's correct.
And did you do any sort of work investigating violent crimes?
Yes.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about that.
Well, the work that we did in Chicago in violent crimes, there's many different type of violent crimes that the FBI works, and there's something like 285 different violations. And several of them are organized crime, where we're looking at different things that might have happened within organized crime, which would be not only thefts, but murders and operations like that. So we work that and investigating to see, what actually happened.
Okay. So did you investigate any work on RICO violations?
In Chicago, yes.
Tell them what a RICO violation is.
Basically, it's a combination of a group that you're looking at. So it's not just one individual. It might be a whole group that you're looking at.
Okay. Stands for recognize. What does it stand for?
Right. I'm trying to think what it stands for.
Crime organization?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so did you do any work as an agent also investigating crimes by gangs?
When I moved to New York, I was in New York for 8 years, and we did a lot of work there.
How is that a federal offense?
Well, it depends on the crime that they're doing. If the gangs are involved in federal violations, and that's why we're working the crime, because it is a federal violation. It just happens to be a gang that might be doing it.
Okay. Did you ultimately become a SWAT team member?
Yes.
What is that?
Special Weapons and Tactics is a organization throughout law enforcement, and they call it a lot of different things. SWAT is one of the acronyms that they use. And it's used to work as a team in order to work in a safer environment when you're going in dealing with violent confrontations. So if you have a violent confrontation and you know somebody has a weapon or they're prone to violence, you usually bring your SWAT team in because it is a team that works together, and it's much safer for the agents and officers that are working in it.
And is SWAT Special Weapons and Tactics?
That's correct.
Okay. Dangerous work?
Sometimes it can be dangerous work, but it's camaraderie that you have amongst the agents and officers that makes it a good team to be on. But it can be dangerous, but if you do it right, then it's not as dangerous.
A suggestion was made earlier today that you've never worked as a police officer.
That's correct.
Okay. And police officer work can be very dangerous.
That's correct.
You have to make split-second decisions.
That's correct.
Sometimes life and death decisions.
That's correct.
Would you say that as a combat infantry platoon leader in Vietnam, winning the Distinguished Service Cross, that you had to make some split-second decisions yourself?
Oh, there's a lot of decisions that we had to make in that period of time. And the type of work that I did there, we were in confrontations almost all the time. So you had to make those decisions and had to learn how to make split-second decisions and do it the safest, best way for yourself and for the men that you're working with. So yes, and that work, the SWAT work that we did, I worked also, we can talk about this later, but in the task forces where we went out and worked with fellow police officers from city, state, local, county, and federal agents, working as one group of people working against certain violations that were occurring.
Likewise, as a SWAT agent for the FBI, did you also have to make split-second decisions there?
Yes, we made several, in the time that I was on the SWAT team, several under arrest of usually violent criminals. Sometimes it was easy, sometimes it was harder. And when you're making these decisions, many times the split-second decisions is when you go into a building, when you go into a room. If an individual is going for a weapon, what do? Do you shoot? Do you plug one? How do you handle it? So you had to make those split-second decisions all the time. And SWAT is based on agents and officers being able to make those kind of decisions. The training is geared towards that.
Okay. So you may not have been a police officer, but it's fair to say that you've had to make split-second decisions that can mean life or death in a variety of contexts.
I would agree to that.
Your Honor, we're going to offer State's Exhibit 20, which is a business records affidavit with the general orders policy from Bald Springs, Texas, their general orders manual. On file. More than 2 weeks, and this is State Exhibit 20. Use of force.
Don't have any objections, Your Honor.
This one is admitted for all purposes and made public.
And we're going to go into more depth on this later, but have you reviewed State's Exhibit 20 in preparation for your testimony here today, Dr. Hayden?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And that's Bald Springs Use of Force Policy Manual, is that right?
Yes, it's, this one right here is the police personal references to the policy.
And does it contain in there at some point rules and guidelines for police officers regarding shooting into moving vehicles?
Yes, under definitions.
Now, you indicated that you had worked in New York City on violent crimes such as gangs. What other work did you do with the FBI?
In the field, when I was in New York, I worked a lot of different criminal matters. We worked bank robberies, fugitives. We worked theft from interstate shipment. I did some of that work. I worked a lot of organized crime, and what myself and 3 other individuals were involved in is planning and doing the arrests with the teams. So just not going out and investigating these crimes, we actually were involved in making the arrest of the individuals that were involved in these crimes.
Fair to say dangerous work?
Yes.
Ultimately, you became a supervisory special agent at the FBI Quantico, correct?
That's correct.
Did you do anything else with the FBI between the time you were at New York before you got to Quantico?
No, I went from New York to Quantico.
And what was the purpose of your going to Quantico?
I was recruited by the, it was at that time, the Special Operations and Research Group, which was the training division within the FBI for SWAT personnel. And I came to that unit, and the purpose of me coming to that unit was to run different programs. I had the SWAT program for about 1.5 years, and we had 8 people within our squad. And then I ran this sniper training for about 1.5 years. And then I developed the air operations, helicopter operations, rappel master work, and shooting scenarios. We were all firearms instructors, but we didn't work on the range as firearms instructors. We worked as tactical instructors, which involved firearms almost all the time.
So are you a pilot yourself?
I'm a pilot, yes.
Describe that to the ladies.
I just got tired of being on the ground all the time, so I wanted to fly a little bit. It was one of my dreams, and I started flying, and then I started flying for the FBI on a part-time basis. And that was doing surveillances of individuals. We had a surveillance team on the ground, and then I would be in the air with a couple other individuals that are spotters, and they'd be spotting the vehicle that would follow them. So the vehicle wouldn't know that anybody was close to them following. We could follow from the air. And a lot of different techniques how we could use that. And so that's what I did on a part-time basis.
And I may have missed this. Did you tell the jury about your creation of the tactical instructor program for the FBI?
No, I didn't say anything about
Okay,
that.
tell them about that.
When I went over to the practical applications unit, they asked me, the director of the FBI, Louis Free, asked me to put together a program for the tactical development for our task force teams. And during that time, I put together this tactical training for our new agents. And the reason for that is that they didn't feel like they had the tactical training that was conducive to their safety as much as it should have been. My training that I was developing was geared towards not only the tactical end of it, how do you tactically go in with a weapon, tactically go in with other gear, and resolve a situation in the most least violent way you can, and that everyone's safe, including the individual you're going in after. So I developed that program, and then that program was developed into several other programs, one being what we call the program that I named it, the Law Enforcement Training for Safety and Survival. We call it the LETS program. And in that program, this was geared towards helping all our task forces, violent crimes task forces within the United States, help them do their job in a better, safer way. Now, a task force within the FBI was ran by the FBI, but on that task force we had federal, we had local, county, city, police, a combination of everyone. And the reason for that, because we wanted all their expertise from all the different areas to come together. The problem is that they weren't used to working together. So my program, the LETS program, was designed to help bring them together so that they could work tactically in a good, sound way that was conducive to their safety and the safety of others.
Were you a primary instructor for both SWAT and tactical firearms?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And what will you be teaching in regard to that?
Well, in the law enforcement program, the whole idea of firearms is it's gear that you wear and you have on yourself in case you need it. If you need it, you have to be able to use it very quickly. And if you don't need it, then you shouldn't be shooting. But you have to have it on yourself. You have to know when to go for it, when not to go for it. So the training that was all geared towards helping officers understand when the right time was to escalate the level of force. Before we heard about the wheel, the officer's presence, and the verbal commands, and it goes all the way through to deadly force. Well, what is taught, that force continuum, is not something that is published out there with all law enforcement agencies. It's more geared towards you go to whatever level you need to go to at that moment in time. So what we taught our agents and officers is that you had to analyze a crime. You had to analyze what was going on. And if you felt like you needed to go to a certain level, you needed to go there right away. You didn't need to do all the other things to get to that level. So if deadly force needed to be used, you would know right then and there that deadly force needs to be used. And the tactical training we gave is to make sure that our agents and officers were very good with their tools, no matter what that tool was. If it was a handgun, a long rifle, or a shoulder weapon, whatever it was, that they were good with it. And also with their handcuffs, and had to be good in handcuffing somebody, because that can become a very dangerous thing if you don't do it right also.
Pursuant to all these duties, did you ever develop any lesson plans for the FBI?
Yes, I did.
Could you tell the ladies and gentlemen about that?
I developed several lesson plans, probably about 20 lesson plans for the FBI. And they're all geared on tactical decisions. And not all geared on tactical decisions, most were geared on tactical decisions. How do you enter into a room? How do you approach an individual? How do you use your weapon when you're in a certain environment? And so those lesson plans were all developed, and they were shared with everybody within the FBI, but it was geared more towards our task forces at that time. And also our new agents learned it, but some of the tactics that we had were geared towards more of the SWAT program. Now, the LETS program was not a SWAT program, but it was a high level of expertise to where our agents that were on the task force, that when they got to a situation where maybe it might be an active shooter, they turned it over to a SWAT program at that time.
You write any articles for the FBI, sir?
Yes, I wrote several articles for the FBI, and they were published within the FBI. At a point in time in the FBI, unless you were a certain approved writer for the FBI, that the articles and everything that we wrote were geared towards helping our agents and officers within the law enforcement community how to better do their jobs in a safer and better way.
Also produce videos for the FBI?
Yes, I produced on our lesson plans. I don't remember exactly how many videos it was. I'm thinking about 8 videos on how to do exactly what the lesson plan is talking about. So if we're talking about a room entry, we did a video on actually entering a room from a camera as you approach in, a camera inside, seeing how everybody approaches in. There's a lot of different techniques that the video group worked with us, the FBI video people, in developing these videos.
Are you familiar with a TV documentary called Inside the FBI, Surviving the Streets?
Yes, that was a documentary done by a Swedish television group that I was familiar with. I was working very closely with a Swedish national police officer. We became very good friends, and we worked together a lot on developing programs that would enhance law enforcement internationally as well as within the United States. This program, they wanted to show how violent crimes within the United States, how police officers were perceiving it, what they had to do, and how they had to survive these violent confrontations.
Basically, the survival mindset for police officers.
That's correct.
And have you testified as an expert before in reasonableness or not reasonableness for the use of force by law enforcement officers?
Yes, I have.
How many times have you done that?
In court, I don't know the exact number, it's 15 or 20, I believe.
Are you a member of the National Advisory Board for Force Science?
Yes, I'm one of the board members.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that's about.
Force Science is an organization that was developed by Dr. Bill Lewinsky. Dr. Lewinsky was a instructor in a training program that was called Caliber Press. Caliber Press put on training programs all over the United States, helping officers understand the mindset, what you should and shouldn't do in violent confrontations. Dr. Lewinsky left them, I think it was around early 2000, and he wanted to develop his own program because of differences he was having with Caliber Press. And he called me up, and he was talking to me, and I talked many times with him about a lot of different things, and wanted me to be on this board and to take a look at what we can do to help officers understand the type of situations they can get into and how they can get out of those situations safely, and everyone can get out of that situation safely.
So you're familiar with his principles and protocols and teaching about what's called force science?
Yes, I'm not only on the board, I have gone through his training.
Okay. So you took that into account in formulating your opinions that you're going to give this jury here today, correct?
Yes, I did.
All right. Did you receive certain documents from me and or my investigators and or my colleagues in preparation for your testimony here today?
Yes, I did.
And will you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you received?
Grand jury testimonies from several of the different individuals. I have to look at the list to see who the individuals were, but several of the individuals. The Dallas County Sheriff's Office summary review. I saw the body cam recorders, both Officer Oliver and Officer Gross. the forensic video that Grant Fredericks had put together. And
Let me ask you this, Doctor. Do you remember receiving grand jury testimony on Kevon Edwards, Vidal Allen, Officer Tyler Gross, Officer Pedro Gonzalez, Jeremy Seaton, Eric Knight, Reginald Mickens, Quincy White, all of whom have testified here before this jury?
yes, I did.
And did you also review material from your own resources?
Yes, I did.
And what would that be?
The material I had a lot of material from the International Associations of Chief of Police, and they are kind of the leading organization on helping police departments all throughout the country do a lot of their policies and procedures that are in line with the law, in line with proper thinking of the law enforcement community. And they've been around for about 100 plus years, whatever it is. And so there's a lot of material that they've written on many different subjects, use of force being one. And so that is one of the areas that I looked at quite heavily. I also looked at the organizations, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the International Association of Chief of Police, the Americans for Effective Law Enforcement. There's about 8 of them in there that I looked at that are all organizations that I consider organizations that are good, solid organizations within law enforcement. But I looked at a lot of their reviews and things that they have written and things that they have done.
And you were in here for Grant Fredericks' testimony, correct?
Yes, I was.
Have you also reviewed his report as well as the items that are embedded in there that are physical exhibits, such as video side-by-side comparisons and analysis?
Yes, I reviewed all of his, not only the documents, but also the videos.
Okay. And was that part of the opinion that you formed and are about to give the jury here in a moment?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And you have a PhD?
I have an EDD, which is a doctorate in education.
Okay. And when and where did you get that?
I got that from Nova Southeastern University.
All right. So you have a doctorate. You're a combat veteran. You're a retired FBI. You teach all around the country still, right?
Yes, I teach around the country, and I also go internationally.
And you testify as an expert,
Yes,
both in federal and state court,
that's correct.
and both for the defense and the prosecution.
Yes, correct.
And in roughly October of 2017, did I dispatch one of my junior colleagues, Assistant District Attorney Andrew Chatham, up to your office to see if we might want to retain your services?
Yes, you did.
And as a result of that, did you and I and Mr. Chatham have several conversations in which the decision was made to retain your services?
That's correct.
Now, you don't work for free, do you?
No, I don't.
You're getting paid for this.
That's correct.
And you'll be paid for your trial testimony as well.
That's correct.
Does that affect in any way the fact that you're being paid, your impartiality as an expert in this case?
No, it doesn't.
Would you say things to this jury just to get paid?
No, I would not.
As a result of your review of all of these transcripts, Dallas Sheriff's Office reports, your review of Grant Fredericks' report and embedded videos, your review of the resources that you know, plus your experience, did you come to certain opinions about what happened on the night of April 29, 2017 at the intersection of Barron Drive and Shepherd Lane in Bald Springs, Texas?
Yes, I did.
And do those opinions include the conduct and behavior of Officer Tyler Gross and the defendant, Roy Allen?
Yes, it does.
Did you form the opinion that the defendant, Roy Oliver, had used excessive force when he shot and killed Jordan Edwards on the night of April 29, 2017.
Yes, I did.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen how you came to that opinion.
When I looked at all the different documents and looked at the video that Mr. Fredericks had put together and everything that he had embedded in that, there's a lot of things that I compared at that point to the grand jury testimonies from different individuals. When I looked at this situation thinking, is this, what kind of force, and the force did he use, was it justified or not, I watched the body cams of both individuals, and then I watched it on Mr. Fredericks' comparison side by side. And in that, I was able to see that the actions of both Officer Gross and Officer Oliver, them going to the scene to investigate the shooting, I thought was appropriate police action, and that's what they should be doing. What weapons they chose to take with them, I figure that's a personal decision for the reason that they had for their own, and I don't know what it was at that time.
Let me interrupt you there.
Yes.
When you're talking about appropriate police activity, you're talking about the entry into the house and the breaking up of the party.
The entry into the house, the breaking up the party, they were telling everyone to go home, and then when they left the house, they thought they might have heard gunfire and they were going to investigate that.
So at that point, no problem.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, but
And the man who was out there with you at the crime scene was me?
that's correct.
Okay. You also made an opinion that no properly trained law enforcement officer would have reason to believe.
Judge, I'm going to object to the leading.
Okay. Respectfully, Your Honor, I'm reading directly from the report that's been, we'll offer 250 at this time, Your Honor, his report.
Judge, it would be hearsay, cumulative. Don't we have objections at this point?
Those objections are sustained.
Okay. Did you form an opinion as to whether a properly trained law enforcement officer would have reason to believe that using deadly force was reasonable under the circumstances?
I did.
And what was that opinion?
My opinion that a reasonable officer would not have done that. And my reason for that is because as they were approaching, there was about a 9-second point from where Officer Oliver retrieves his rifle to the point he gets to the shot is fired. During that point in time, it has been mentioned that the eye is better than the video, that you can see more. And I would agree to that, you can. As he's running, or both of them are walking at the time, and coming up in this 9 seconds, there's a lot of time that Officer Oliver has to look over at Officer Gross and see what he's doing. He can see well, he can see Officer Gross approaching this vehicle. Officer Gross is walking towards this vehicle. The vehicle's not coming towards him, he's walking towards the vehicle. At that point in time, he starts to pick up his pace, and he ends up getting to the vehicle about the same time, or getting close to the vehicle about the same time that Officer Gross gets to the back window, and the back window is broken. A fraction of a second is when Officer Gross is by that window. Now, with Officer Oliver coming up on that at that time, he had plenty of time to see that Officer Gross was not in danger. That Officer Gross was a distance from the car, from the back wheel, and he was walking towards that. So he had plenty of time to understand he's not in danger. As he's coming up on that vehicle, what happens at that point in time, he doesn't look, or he does look, and I don't know what he says he's doing at that point in time. But an example that we used to use with the training with our officers is that I'd say, take two fingers and put them up about a foot apart from each other and look at one finger. Can you clearly see the other finger? You won't be able to. It's blurry. Why? Because you're looking in your peripheral vision. When you're looking in your peripheral vision, you cannot obtain information that you need. You have to turn your head or turn your eyes at least to that point to where you're able to see it. That's a time constraint because moving your eyes just from this point to this point, looking from my finger to this finger, it takes about 0.2 of a second to look over, to look back. If I focus, look from this finger to this finger, and I focus on it, it takes even more time. So you're talking about, for anybody in Officer Oliver's position there, to look over at that instant in time and see what's happening to Officer Gross, it would have taken a good half a second to 3/4 of a second. What we saw in the video is that if he would have done that and come back on what he was looking at on target, let's say, is that that vehicle would have been past him. The vehicle would have never been in front of him. So there's no way at that point in time when the window was broken that he could say, I looked over and saw that he was in danger and then looked back and engaged the target. Not enough time to do that. So that's why I'm saying that there was no threat to Officer Gross at any time. He says so, and I don't see anything in the videos that show it to be a threat. So I don't believe that Officer Oliver would have seen it as a threat. So he shot at that point in time. That's why I say it was excessive force. It was not necessary because no crime had been committed that would have brought that deadly force to bear. Because deadly force is only used if you have to defend yourself, defend another, and you have to look at this thing as it's a terrible thing you have to use. But if you have to use it, you better use it, and you better use it right.
I'm showing you now what's been marked as State Exhibit 250. You recognize that, do you?
Yes, that appears to be my report.
You prepared it?
Yes, I did.
And did you prepare this report basically at the time that you were making the analysis and opinions that are contained in that report?
Yes.
And is that a business record that you're custodian of?
Yes, it is.
We offer State 250 this time, right?
Same objection.
836, 838.
Your objection's the same. Submitted for record purposes.
Yes, sir. Do you have an opinion one way or the other as to whether the defendant intended to shoot his rifle as he ran toward the subject vehicle?
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion?
That opinion goes right along with what I was saying just a second ago. After looking at the video enhancement and video from, forensic video from Mr. Frederick, and looking at the statements of some of the individuals that made the grand jury testimony, two individuals, Quincy White, was over by the car, the victim car, and also Jeremy Seaton, who was across the street. Both of those two individuals said that he was bringing up his rifle as he approached, as he got to the site where he shot. If you're bringing up your rifle just from shooting technique alone, you're not bringing up your rifle and looking over it in a different direction. If you're bringing up your rifle, you're bringing it up in order to shoot and to be able to be right in front of your eyes. That's where the rifle's going to come up. So I don't know of anybody that's ever taught or seen somebody bring up the rifle and looking somewhere else. They're looking straight ahead when they're shooting. When he brought that rifle up, it's 0.358 of a second from the time the window breaks to the time he shoots. Not enough time for him to look over, see what was happening, come back on target, and shoot. So when that rifle was coming up, I believe at that time in time, that's when he decided he was going to stop the vehicle.
In making your opinions, your report here today, do you take into account the severity of the crime at issue?
That's correct.
Okay. Explain that to the ladies and gentlemen jury.
Well, the thing that you look at when you're talking about the severity of the crime is the objective reasonableness. Is that I want to make sure an officer is reasonable in his actions, whatever it is that he's doing. And there's three things, and this came out of the Supreme Court ruling, Graham versus Connor, that the three areas that you have to look at is the severity of the crime. What is the severity of the crime? Is there a crime that is severe enough to use the force or do the thing you're going to do? And that's the reasonableness factor. The other thing is your life or the life of another officer in danger or another innocent person in danger. And if that's not the case, then the reasonableness factor is another thing you have to consider. And also is the person trying to evade arrest. So when you're looking at the reasonableness factor, you're looking at those three things. Is it a crime that's serious enough? The severity of the crime? Your protection of yourself or fellow officers or innocent persons? Or is someone trying to evade arrest? And so that reasonableness factor is very, very important. When we look at this thing, we say, what would a reasonable officer do? An officer with the same training and experience, what would he do in this situation? And what I'm saying with Officer Oliver, I think an officer with the same training experience would never have decided to take that shot.
Okay. And you were in here when Mr. Fredericks was showing the jury about the position of the vehicle as it drove south on Shepherd Lane, correct?
Yes, I was.
Based on that, do you have an opinion one way or the other about whether the defendant had made the decision to shoot even before he reached the intersection of Shepherd and Barron?
I believe when he was coming up and he started to bring his rifle up, I believe at that point in time he decided to shoot. The vehicle had backed up and at that point in time was starting to move forward. And I think when he started bringing his weapon up, that's when he had made his decision to shoot at that time.
Did you ever see from your review of the body cams in this case or the testimony of Mr. Fredericks that Officer Tyler Gross was ever in danger from the vehicle being driven by Vidal Allen?
There's nothing that I saw in any of the videos that showed that Officer Gross was in danger. Plus, Officer Gross on statement said he never felt like he was in danger. So looking at that, looking at the video, and where the vehicle was positioned and where he was positioned, it never looked to me as if he was in danger of being run over by that vehicle.
How about the defendant? Did he appear to ever be in any danger?
Where you see the defendant in Mr. Frederick's videos is that he appears to be about 9 feet away from the vehicle. So at no time was he ever in danger.
How much time did the defendant have from the time that he started running until the time that he engaged that vehicle to decide whether or not he really needed to do that or not?
He had about 9 seconds to make that decision and gather information.
So if someone said that officers have to make split-second decisions, is that what we're talking about, 9 seconds or not?
No, split-second decisions is exactly what it says. Split second, fractions of seconds. That an officer might have to make a decision in a life or death situation. And in this, he had 9 seconds before he ever got in that position to shoot. He had plenty of time to review the area, to know what was going on, and no split-second decision was made.
Do you have an opinion one way or the other whether if the defendant had looked to his left to see where Officer Gross was, he would have known that it was unreasonable to fire?
I believe from the video and looking at the video where everyone was, if Officer Oliver had looked to his left, he would have seen that Officer Gross was never in danger. But as I said before, if he had looked to his left, by the time he came back on site, the car would have been past him because it would have been too much time for him to look to the left and see. So that's why I don't believe he ever really saw it over there, except out of his peripheral vision.
Do you have an opinion one way or the other whether the defendant was out of control and a danger to innocent persons, namely the passengers and driver of that Chevrolet Impala?
I believe when he ran up and he brings that rifle up, he's out of control because there's nothing that's happened to that point in time with Officer Oliver or Officer Gross that put either one of them in danger, or by shooting and using deadly force as he did, he would have been able to stop it.
And you have in front of you State's Exhibit 20, which has been admitted. Is there a section on State's Exhibit 20 that talks about reasons to not shoot at vehicles? On page 4.
It's under the deadly force restrictions. It talks about the warning shots should be fired, firearms should not be discharged. I'm sorry. Am I talking a little too fast? Under deadly force restrictions, it says firearms shall not be discharged at a moving vehicle in an attempt to disable the vehicle.
And this is from Bald Springs General Orders Manual.
That's correct.
And in your training experience, an officer such as the defendant should be familiar with this.
Yes.
Now, if you've got a moving vehicle like this, is it difficult or easy to accurately acquire the driver of the vehicle and shoot him or her?
No, it's the moving target is very difficult to hit. And so trying to hit a individual that's in a vehicle that's moving, it's, you have a small target, and it's very difficult for somebody to do that unless they're a very good shot.
Okay. Now, are you wasting time that you could be getting out of the way?
Yes, it even says here that should attempt to move out of the path if possible instead of discharging firearm at any of the occupants.
So, provision number 3 on page 4, it's admitted into evidence in State's Exhibit 20. Can you read that to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Number 3 is because of the low probability of penetrating a vehicle with a handgun, officers threatened by an oncoming vehicle should attempt to move out of the path if possible instead of discharging a firearm at it or any other of its occupants. However, if an officer reasonably believes that a person is immediately threatening the officer or another person with deadly force by means of a vehicle, an officer may use deadly force against a driver of the vehicle.
Such as if maybe if a person was directly in front of an oncoming vehicle. Possibly.
In law enforcement across the globe, across the entire world really, because I've taught in 40 different countries, is that...
Judge, I'm going to object. This is all speculative. We're talking about Bald Springs policy, and this speaks for itself.
Go ahead.
is that shooting at vehicles doesn't accomplish anything, really. Because if you shoot a vehicle with a smaller caliber weapon, a handgun or shoulder weapon, it's not going to disable that vehicle. If you shoot the individual that's driving the vehicle, you have a vehicle that's out of control. So
You got a vehicle that's out of control, so it could be even more dangerous.
It could be more dangerous. It could run over whoever. So unless it's extenuating circumstances that you believe within your heart of hearts that the only way I can protect myself or protect somebody else is to shoot the individual, then you would do that. But only if you believe that doing that is going to protect the life of somebody.
Is there another risk when you engage a moving vehicle? Let's suppose you think you need to kill the driver or shoot the driver. What about the risk of killing innocent third parties?
When you shoot into a vehicle, you're using deadly force when you use a firearm. And if you're shooting into a vehicle that has more than one person in it, you could hit another person also. So you always have to be concerned that if I'm shooting into that vehicle, there might be other people in that vehicle that are going to be hit that are innocent persons.
Who could be totally innocent?
Could be not involved in anything totally innocent.
Like Jordan Edwards.
Yes.
You watched that body cam of both Tyler Rose and the defendant. that Chevrolet Impala, as it's moving from the west to the east on Barron Drive, is it moving towards Gross or the defendant or away from him?
No, it's moving away from him at that point in time.
If there's anybody that's trying to close the gap between Officer Gross and the car, is it the car moving towards him or him moving towards the car?
Officer Gross is walking towards the vehicle. At no time does he seem like he's taking on a running gesture that he has to go to that vehicle. He's walking towards that vehicle. And at that time, that's when he brings his weapon up and hits the back window and breaks that back window. So at no time was that vehicle ever moving towards Officer Gross.
You were in here when Mr. Fredericks told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that Vidal Allen had turned his wheels to the left, had gone across the center lane, still headed south, but in the northbound lane of Shepherd. Did you hear that?
That's correct, I
Do
did.
you agree with that in your expert testimony?
I do.
So away from Officer Gross, not towards him.
That's correct.
Away from the defendant, not towards him.
That's correct.
And you heard Mr. Fredericks say that the first two shots were perpendicular shots, 90-degree angle. The last three were some kind of angle to the southeast. I would not agree necessarily that it was 45-degree angle. Do you agree with that opinion as well?
I don't know if it's exactly at a 90-degree angle or if there's a little bit of an angle there. I don't know.
Okay. But you do agree that it was close to being perpendicular.
Yes.
And the last three were close to being a 45-degree angle.
Yes, I would say so, yes.
And shot well after, all five shots, shot after the car had passed by Officer Gross.
Yes.
And the last three shots after the car had passed not only Officer Gross, but also the defendant.
That's correct.
And that Gross never fired.
That's correct.
He never felt in danger for himself.
That's what he said, yes.
And that he knew that that car had turned away from him.
I don't remember if he said that. He knew the car turned away from him. I don't know if he said that.
All right. And the result of this is exactly what you just opined is one of the dangers of shooting into a car, that you kill an innocent child. And that's what happened here.
And if you're shooting into a vehicle with more than one occupant, you could hit 2 or 3 of those occupants. I mean, you don't know because it's a moving target, and your accuracy to hit anything in that target might not be pinpoint accuracy. It might be somewhere within that vehicle you're going to hit.
So it could have not only shot Jordan Edwards, but it could have shot Maximus Everett, Kevon Edwards, Maxwell Everett, and the driver of the car, Vidal Allen.
I think it's only by the grace of God they didn't get hit.
By the grace of God.
Yeah.
We pass it.
Cross-examination today?
Yes, sir, thank you. Dr. Hayden, I had a chance to meet you earlier today, and I told you then that every time, I've taught my son every time he meets a Vietnam veteran to try to shake his hand and welcome him home, because I think you and I remember when we came home, there were no parades, wasn't anybody clapping at the airport, and there wasn't anybody saying welcome home.
That's correct. That's correct. It's a good thing to teach your son.
Well, he's a fine young man. You were asked to provide an opinion in this case, but when the DA's office came to see you, did they tell you they had already indicted Roy Oliver?
I honestly don't remember if Andy Chatham told me that or not.
Well, are you aware now that he had already been indicted and put on bond when they were looking for an expert to help him?
No, I was not aware of that.
And from a practical standpoint, you've given us great information to work with, but let me ask you a little bit about it. Judge, I need the 2 reports and the VTAE that been admitted. Do you have those still up there?
This would have.
Okay. All right. Last time I saw them, they were up there.
The witness has 250, Judge.
Yeah, I'm looking for the first report and the VTAE.
Vitae's on the back of 250, Ms. Ryan.
280, is that what
Well, this one's 280. I don't think you admitted it.
250 is on the witness stand. The second report, the first one is in Mr. White's hand.
Yeah. I went over this with you before. Let me ask you. You first sent your first report in January. Yes, no, you sent your first report in December, correct?
That's correct.
And at that time, you attached some attachments to it telling us about you. And I asked you earlier, did that same attachment that you put on your first report, was it also supplied on your amended report?
The attachment was with my amended report, and I thought I had that other information in those attachments. And if that's the attachment that came with it, then I sent the wrong one.
Well, you understand that when the DA's office provides a defense team with information for us to hire our own expert, then we want to know what you reviewed. That's fair to say.
It is, yes.
So would it be fair to say that what you told us, both in your first report and in your amended report, we didn't know everything you'd looked at? Is that a fair statement?
No, because in my report, I talked about Mr. Frederick's video analysis.
Well, I'm talking about the information that you said was provided to you.
You just said the report.
Well, the information you put on your vitae, on your attachments.
On my attachments, yes.
So we weren't aware of the things that you said to us that you had looked at.
For some reason, it was not included. That's correct.
And I think Mr. Snipes has been very methodical in asking you about cases that you've worked on. And I think you said that you gave us a list of all of the depositions that you had given, correct?
No, I gave you the list of depositions, I believe, in the last 4 years.
Yes, sir. And did you go through your files and make sure you gave all of those to us?
I tried to. I don't do my expert witness work as a full-time job, so I don't have a crew to help me do a lot of these things, and I'm doing it as best I can at times.
Well, did you remember putting the case of Shirley Francis versus Sheriff Adrian Garcia of the Harris County Sheriff's Department on your list of depositions that you'd given?
I don't remember if I did or not. Let me look.
Sure.
Now, I do want to remind the court about our motion in limine about cases involving other police officers, if that's where Mr. Lane is going with this.
Okay, what is the name of the deposition?
It was Shirley Francis versus Sheriff Adrian Garcia and others from the Harris County Sheriff's Department.
I don't see that.
Would it be fair to say that as an expert witness that has testified as much as you have, that there is often and usually another expert witness that doesn't agree with you?
I would think that'd be true, yes.
And we have to wait and see whether, juries agree with you or other experts that come in the courtroom.
I would say yes.
Would it be fair to say that your assessment is not always what other people assess?
I would agree with that.
Tell this jury, and let me ask you a few things. Are you a Texas certified peace officer?
I am not.
Have you ever gone through the training that involved with being a Texas peace officer?
I have not.
Do you know the various levels of certification that police officers can have in Texas?
I've done different cases in Texas, and I've seen those lists. the certain levels, but I could not tell you what they are right now.
Well, would you agree with me from what you learned that each level was a certification of a higher degree of proficiency and knowledge as they go up?
Yes, I would agree. I would agree with that.
From being basic to maybe master or even higher.
That's correct.
And would you agree with me that this is a Texas case and it's really involving the Texas Penal Code?
It's a Texas case involving penal code, but it's a murder case, so I'd really look to the higher courts, what they would say about that.
Well, you've told this jury about a case of Graham versus Connor, but that was a civil case in which the Supreme Court said, look guys, if you're going to review what police officers do, you can't use 20/20 hindsight, correct?
That's correct, and it's a civil case, but it's a case that deals with the reasonableness of an officer.
I understand and I agree. But I'm saying that the main thing that, excuse me, that allergies are bad in Dallas, the main thing that the Supreme Court wanted everyone to know that's reviewing these cases is you can't look at what the partner thought, you can't look at what some video analysis has shown, spending $100,000 recreating, so you have to try to figure out the eyes of the officer and whether or not his conduct was reasonable under the same or similar circumstances.
Yes, you have to look at what the officer is thinking at that time, but the only way you can know that is by reading the reports and seeing the videos, what he's doing up to that point in time.
Well, but you never know what he's thinking, do you?
That's correct, you don't.
And I believe in some of these cases that you testified, you used the term an officer under the same or similar circumstances with the same background and training.
That's correct.
And from looking at your vitae, you really spent a lot of time after you left, and you should go back to Chicago from what I read today or yesterday.
No, thank you.
I mean, you go back and help them.
I know, no, thank you.
Definitely have a problem. From looking at it, it seems to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like once you left the field, which I believe was in 1999, is that correct?
That's correct.
You really became an instructor.
I would agree with that, yes.
And it would be fair to say that the last time you made an arrest was in 1983.
That's correct.
And that you've never shot anyone in the line of duty as a police officer.
Not as a police officer, no.
And the training that you developed, I was looking at all of this, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, New York and Chicago from August of 1973 to August of 1983. And during that period of time, you told me that you were certified by the FBI as an instructor in a lot of following areas. Now, are you still certified in these areas?
As far as I know, there's not a decertification within the FBI, so once you're certified, you're always certified.
Have you ever told anyone in a deposition that you haven't gone back and recertified?
I have gone back and done recertification programs at different times just because they allowed me to.
Well, you told me that you were certified by the FBI as an instructor, and you went through this with Mr. Snipes, but I became fascinated when you said you were certified by the FBI as an instructor and pilot in command for fixed-wing aircraft.
I was not certified as a pilot in command certified instructor. I was a pilot within the FBI.
And where did you do your primary basic training?
In Chicago.
And what ratings do you hold today?
What ratings do I hold today? I hold my private license, my instrument rating, and that's pretty much it for the ratings that I hold.
Do you remember about an hour and a half ago I asked you if you were a pilot and you said you weren't a pilot?
No, that was more than a half an hour ago. That was yesterday, and you asked me if I was a pilot, because I said I was in the 173rd Airborne, and you said, when did you receive your pilot training? I said, I do have a memory. And I said, I did not go to flight school. I didn't go to flight school in the military. It was as a civilian I went to flight school.
So when you say the FBI certified you as an instructor, as a pilot in command for fixed-wing aircraft, I misread that?
Well, if I said that, I spoke wrong on that. They did not certify me as an instructor. I was not an instructor as a flight instructor for the FBI.
When we looked at your resume, your VTA, you talk about being a supervisory special agent, and that was from June of 92 to January of 99, correct?
That from when to when?
You put here August of 1983 to January of 1999, and then June 1992 to January of 1999.
No, I became a special agent in the FBI in 1973 when I went into Quantico for training.
And you told us in this that you became a program manager for tactical instructor program for new agent training, and that was in 1990 and 1992.
That's correct.
And he told us that you ran a special operations and research unit, and that was 1983 to 1990.
I did not run the Special Operations and Research Unit. I was a member of that, and that was from 1983 to 1990.
Well, I guess my question is, from a practical standpoint, and you've been around this a long time, the world of being a police officer has changed a lot since you were instructing at the FBI Academy.
There are things that change, but being a police officer is pretty consistent has been consistent for a long time. It's a dangerous occupation, and they're out there to defend the people and to help the people as best they can and to enforce the laws that they're asked to enforce out there.
Of course. But I'm talking about just the general atmosphere and the way police officers are perceived today.
The way they're perceived today is different than the way they were perceived 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But I could also say the way they were perceived 20 years ago was different than the way they were received 15 years ago. It constantly changes. It's a fluid thing. It depends on the environment of the community. It could be in one community, it could be very different, and you go to another community, it could be the same, it's been the same for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years. So it's hard to say across the board that it's really that different. Police officers' jobs are very similar to what they used to be.
And I guess if we take your words based upon an officer's training and experience, then we have to look and see what type of training that officer has and experience that officer has, right?
His training experience is a lot.
And you would expect a 20-year veteran of the police force might react differently than a 6-year or 7-year veteran.
I would say that, but with an explanation. The 20-year veteran does not always act better than the 6-year veteran. But from the training point, it depends upon the individual. If an individual has received a lot of good training and has used that training to better himself, then he would be most likely a better police officer.
So would it be fair to say that you think that the paramount issue, and being a trainer yourself, for good police work is training your officers?
Training your officers properly, and properly is the right word, not training. There's a lot of training that goes on out there that doesn't mean anything. Training it realistically and properly is what you're looking for.
I agree with you completely. So then we have to look at the training records of an officer whose conduct we are evaluating, correct?
You'd have to look at the training records of the officer, the training cadre, what their records are.
And when did you do that for Officer Oliver?
I did not do that.
When you agreed to be a expert witness in this case, when did you find out that he had already been indicted? Do you remember?
I don't remember when that was, but I think it was after I wrote my report.
And did you write the first report before you found out?
I believe I did, but I wasn't sure exactly when I found out. It could have been even after I wrote the second report.
And you say in both of these reports that the following report is being submitted in accordance with Rule 26A1 of the Federal Rules of Procedure. What does that mean?
So what I understand, the way they want the report written as far as the attachments go, that's pretty much what I understand it to be.
Okay. Did you go through the penal code and the various provisions that might apply in this case? Did the DA's office tell you what might apply in this case?
I received some of those. I looked at them, not being an attorney, a lot of legal jargon in there that I didn't want to get mixed up in because I really didn't understand everything that was in there. So I saw it, but I didn't review it in great depth.
When you began then to form your opinions, I believe you told us that you did go out to the scene. Was that after your first report or after your second report?
No, that was before my first report.
And how did the two reports change? Did the DA's office tell you they needed more information in there? Did they tell you what they wanted you to put in there?
No, what happened in that is that I was going back and forth with Mr. Snipes on the report, had my process of writing it, and in that time I was reviewing and continuing to review and picked up on some things that I saw that I had made a mistake just by putting it in there, and so I wanted to correct those mistakes. That's why I put amended report on it, because I didn't know if the first report went in as official report for the disclosure date. So I did put amended report so there would be no confusion.
Well, what mistakes did you make in your first report?
I don't know if this report has it spelled out, but one of the areas was on, I believe it was slide 142, where Officer Gross is lifting his weapon. I said it was Oliver that was lifting his weapon at that time. And I picked that up.
Well, you agree with me that Officer Gross, whether I think the jury will make their own decision whether he was walking fast, running up to the car. He pulled his weapon out and pointed it at that vehicle.
I don't know if he pointed at that vehicle. He did bring the weapon out. That's right.
Is there anything on that video that would lead you to believe he didn't point it at that vehicle?
I didn't see anything that says or shows that he pointed at the vehicle. When he took his weapon out, he had his weapon out. When he came up to the car, he hit the back window, which broke the window, and he hit it with his weapon. What part of the weapon he hit it with, I don't know. Whether it was a light, whether it was the front of the weapon or what. So I don't know exactly where that weapon was pointed, so I didn't want to say.
Did the DA's office provide you with a copy of Gross's deposition, his testimony from in here?
From the grand jury, yes.
From the trial?
Not from the trial.
Well, why would an officer withdraw their weapon if everything was not a dangerous, or as that officer perceived a dangerous situation?
Well, I can't tell you what's in Gross.
What would you train an officer? Would
When I would train an officer,
to do that?
if an officer is coming up on something, he believes that there could be a threat, that at that time he would draw his weapon.
And wouldn't that officer point the weapon towards the threat?
No, not necessarily.
Well, if he thought the threat was real, then are you saying that you would train an officer not to be ready to use that deadly force?
Well, as I've trained my children, as well as I've trained all law enforcement across the country, don't point that weapon at anybody you're not willing to pull the trigger on.
Yes, sir.
So pointing a weapon is not something that I'm teaching somebody to do. Be ready with that weapon, yes. You want to be ready with that weapon, and if you need to get it on target, you can get it on there in a fraction of a second.
That's for officer safety.
That's for officer safety as well as the safety of the individual you're pointing it at.
You being a combat veteran and a police officer, can you tell this jury what your perception of a backup fellow in your platoon, your company, whatever it is, and a backup officer in the street? What's the difference?
In combat's much different.
Well, let me ask it this way.
Yeah.
You were very proud to tell us, and you should be, that you used your combat experience in forming your opinion in this case.
Combat experience is one of the things I looked at, and that combat experience is experience of my life. my life during that period of time in combat. How did I perceive things? How did I look at things? And I tried to take that in my teaching. How can I teach it to other people so they'll be better and safer for it? So, you know, I try to look at these things in a realistic, honest way.
Did the DA's office tell you that they had Roy Oliver's 201 file?
If they did, I never got it.
Did they tell you that he was a two-tour combat veteran out of Iraq?
I knew he was, but I didn't know anything about his Iraqi war.
Well, if you use your combat experience in your police work, would it be fair to say that most police officers that have combat experience have that in their head? That they use that to their advantage?
Well, it's kind of a very interesting question, and let me answer that. Is that what we had for a long time in law enforcement is that they wanted to be trained by the best. They went to Navy SEALs. They went to Ranger battalions. They went to a lot of different things to get the training for the military. We found out very soon, and I was probably the one that did this, fought that very hard, saying we're not war veterans. We're not veterans in the military in a combat situation when we go out in society. We cannot take that out there. We have to learn from that and learn when you should do certain things and how your mind functions and when I myself am going to act in a certain way. So I want to know all of the things I can know about myself. But we have to take that off the table. You are not in a war situation, and you should not respond in any way, shape, or form like the military is, unless it's conducive to the way law enforcement would train and the way they would operate.
I agree with you completely. I'm just asking you, you said the second sentence in your conclusion is based upon my combat experience.
Based upon, partially on my combat experience. If I said basically on my combat experience, I'm wrong on that. That's just one aspect of what my background is.
So you were wrong to put that down.
Based on my combat experience as well as other experiences, and I think I do have those other experiences in
Well,
there.
you agree with me that people cannot separate experiences.
Well, you better be able to separate experiences.
Right. How do you do that?
It's not something you do easy. It's a mental mindset. Is that what you have to look at within your own thinking and your own ability is to understand who I am and what I am about. You have to understand what's right and what's wrong. In a combat situation in Iraq, Afghanistan, and you have to shoot somebody, hey, you might have to do it and you're totally justified. In a law enforcement setting in this country, you might not be justified in that. So you have to separate those two. You cannot combine the two.
Well,
And you want to get your strength that you can from anywhere.
I agree with you completely. I'm just saying you put it in your report that you were using that. You wanted us to believe that you used that as part of forming your conclusion.
And you're right, you said part of forming my conclusion, and that answer to that would be yes.
Well, you don't fault the police officers on the street that have combat experience, do you?
I love them.
Special to you, aren't they?
Well, you know, they're special to the country, and I admire a man that does go into a situation where there is combat.
Yeah,
but just because he goes into that situation does not mean he can take it home.
I understand. These guys, they're doing it and they're volunteering to do it. Back when you and I got dealing with it, it wasn't much of a volunteer.
Well, I volunteered, so I can't say anything about that.
So did I, but they were encouraging us to volunteer because they were
Yes,
dragging us anyway.
That's correct.
Okay. I tell my kid he's volunteering, but he tells me I'm not that.
He doesn't understand.
All right, well, then we know what your experience is and we know what your vitae is. Let's talk about the training that you put into this formula for making your conclusions in this case. And you told us that you were on the board for Foresights.
That's correct.
Do you agree with me that that's one of the premier programs that people go to learn about the dynamics of the human body and how it reacts?
When you say premier program, it's a program that's out there that Dr. Lewinsky has been good in in advertising this, and it's a good program, and a lot of people can learn a lot of things from it. But there's a lot of different programs, so I would say it's one of the programs out
Well,
there.
you're on the board. Are you still on the board?
I'm still on the board.
Are you an active member?
I don't know how many board members are really active.
Well, I mean, are you providing input into the training program?
No, Bill Lewinsky pretty much does that himself
Well, do you agree with Bill Lewinsky?
in some things.
And when did you go through Force Science?
I went through Force Science training. I talked to him about 3 years ago, I think it was, and I said, Bill, I've never been through the training. I think I need to go through it. So I went through the training. I think it was about 3 years ago.
And from that training, what was the first thing that you took into consideration from Force Science in forming an opinion?
Well, in order to understand this question, is that Bill Lewinsky and I go back about 30 years. A lot of the things that Bill Lewinsky was teaching in his Force Science are the things that I was developing before I had left the FBI, and I was developing for my programs. He and I talked a lot about it. So I knew a lot about what he was teaching and how he was teaching it, and I wanted to see exactly what it was he was teaching. And so I looked at it, and I decided, to go through the training, and I saw some good things that I saw out of the training that he was doing, figures and statistics and things like that.
Well, I guess the better question, and lawyers often don't ask good questions, but what is the purpose of Force Science? What's the main goal of Force Science?
There's really one goal for Force Science, is to protect the police officer. Bill Lewinsky, when he does a lot of this work, it's all geared towards helping the police officer understand the problems that he can be confronted or she can be confronted with. And his program is geared towards assisting and helping police officers.
Well, but also, Mr. Lewinsky, and if you participated in this, y'all were studying the action-reaction time, right?
That's one of the big things, yes.
Well, it's really pretty important to understand the human body and the brain and the muscles and the command to shoot and then the command to stop shooting, the time frames. That was what Bill Lewinsky was talking about, wasn't it?
Bill Lewinsky, that's one of the things that he was looking at in what you're referring to as the Tempe study, Tempe, Arizona, in the early 2000s. And he spent his own money, spent his own time doing this and trying to define the action versus reaction of when a police officer shoots an individual in the back. Can it be justified? And so that's what he was looking at, the action versus reaction. The individual that is walking away and he turns with a weapon, and you, the police officer, decide to shoot, and the individual turns back and you still get shot in the back. Why did that happen? That was his number one thing that he wanted to define. And then the other was, stopping the shoot.
Well, what did Force Science teach officers about the reaction time, the mental capacity to perceive the danger, to assess the danger, and to react to the danger? And then they have to reverse that process to get it to stop, don't they?
Yes. In the Tempe study, it was a very clinical situation. It was very, very clean. It was done in a laboratory type atmosphere. And it was done with the officers being stimulated by a light or by sound. And what they found was sound, you can react a little bit faster than a light. But he's doing most of his studies with a light. And then they started, when they videotaped it and they started taking pictures, was with an individual, and they time him how fast he could turn. And then an officer, it depends when you're at the top of your thinking pattern. My finger is coming on the trigger and I'm squeezing, and all of a sudden I see the clue, I don't need to shoot. Will you still pull the trigger? And what they were finding is that would occur. On the other, if you just came off the trigger and you had the same scenario and you decided you didn't have to shoot, would you still shoot? And what they were able to find is that it takes about 0.06 of a second to take your finger off the trigger, not shoot, not pull the trigger. And it takes about a 0.25 a second, about a quarter of a second for your brain to see that information, tell your finger, don't squeeze, and then it's over with at that time. Now it can be much faster than that too, or it can be much slower depending on the individual and the training that they had. So that kind of training is what he was doing in the Tempe study in the force science.
And that, of course, was in a sterile environment in a lab where everybody knew they were going home after the experiment was over.
And as he said, the thing that was there was no stressors as far as, sex, crime, anything you can think of that would alter your decision whether you shoot. Male, female, child, adult, whatever. So none of those things were added. And to his understanding of his program, he did that because he was trying to develop and understand the one thing of the action versus reaction.
Did he solve the mystery?
No, he didn't solve the mystery because this started back with Dr. Fackler. Martin Fackler, who was a colonel in the U.S. Army, he was a medical doctor, and he was the head of the wound ballistics, and he's the one that started a lot of this thinking. Bill Lewinsky knew him. I worked with Dr. Fackler on the wound ballistics when our agents were shot in Miami. So I knew Dr. Fackler, and I knew what he was looking at, and I asked him, well, what can we do about, forget about when an agent's shot, how do we get to the point of not having that agent shot? What can we do to speed things up? So we started looking at the action versus reaction. That's when Bill Lewinsky talked to him, and then he and Dave Grossi, who has written several different books and worked with Dr. Lewinsky, that's when he decided that he needed to do more work on this. So it's something that's been a living project for him.
From a practical standpoint, I believe this whole incident was like less than a second, correct? The shot fired? From
the first shot fired to the last shot fired, 0.954 seconds.
You think you clap your hands as fast as this whole thing happened?
I tell you, I don't know if you can even clap your hands fast.
That's that fast, isn't it?
It's very fast, yes.
Well, what did you come to the conclusion and what did you learn? And let's talk about what force science, since you're on the board, teaches officers about the timing of perceiving the danger, assessing the danger, trying to figure out what you're going to do, then executing it. What is that time frame there?
Well, the time frame isn't just a number that we look at.
What's the average?
Well, the average here again is not just a number we look at. If you're looking at just the trigger pull, the assessment on light on his study, it was 0.31 seconds.
0.31 seconds?
Yeah, about a third of a second.
Can you clap your hands that fast?
Well, I tell you, I can decide to do a lot of other things faster than that. And one thing I can decide is that that's not the answer. That's only one calculated number that Bill Lewinsky put out there. And that was in a very sterile environment. But when you're looking at how it applies to this, and this is what you're telling me, is that you have to, number one, you have to see the threat. In Bill Lewinsky's study, the light came on. That was the threat. That was my clue to pull the trigger. In this situation, there is no threat. What is the threat? There is no threat at that point. I don't believe that...
Wait, you're talking about in this situation, you're talking about the Oliver?
About the Oliver shooting.
Well, that's your concept from reading all the testimony of people after the fact.
Well, you're asking me about the time, and I'm trying to explain to you in the time here.
Well, let's talk about the Lewinsky study.
The Lewinsky study, and I am talking about that and how it applies to this, because if you're just talking in numbers, it's about an average of 0.31 seconds, about a third of a second. That's the study that Bill Lewinsky did on action versus reaction about shooting someone in the back. This does not apply to that.
Well, 4 sides that you went through and countless other officers, training officers, street cops have gone through has taught, what do you teach officers about it? And after you go through the course, what did you learn?
What you should learn in going through this course is that you have to have your mind engaged when you're going to be involved in any kind of a violent confrontation. If you're looking at action versus reaction, action will always be reaction. And that's kind of what the studies always show, is that I can act quicker than you can react to me. So that's what this study was all about, and what they're trying to show is you have to be safe. You have to have your mind engaged. Hopefully, number one, you never get involved in that confrontation, or you can see it coming and stop it before it ever gets to that point. And that's what you want to do. And the Lewinsky study is that. His study is not all about shooting and things like that. It's about understanding what happens and why action versus reaction is a violent or a confrontation that you don't want to get yourself involved in.
Well, as an FBI agent, if I understand from reading everything you gave us, you practice and FBI practices teaching people how to enter buildings, do all sorts of arrests, and you've emphasized in what I read about you is that it's a matter of training and planning and making sure the team knows exactly what the execution is supposed to be. Is that fair?
It's fair. That's one of the aspects, yes.
Well, I know, but I mean, that's what most of your training is about, is excellent planning, excellent training, and anticipating through videos and things like that, training scenarios so officers can deal with it.
Well, it's training scenarios so officers know what to do in that, but that's just an aspect of the training. The training is mental as well as physical. You have to understand the mental concepts. You have to understand what action versus reaction is. You don't want to confront somebody and lose that battle. You know that sometimes things can be in a fraction of a second. And you don't want to be caught in that situation. So the training that he has done and what he continues to do is try to get people to understand that so they never get involved in it.
And of course, you have no idea what training Oliver and the Ball Springs Police Department provides for their basic officers.
I really don't know.
Would that be something you'd be interested in?
As purely as an academic situation, I'd be interested in that.
Wouldn't factor into everything you've told us?
Not in what I've said in here, because we're not dealing with just the shooting aspect at all. We're dealing with the mental aspect of, is there a threat or not?
Well, I believe you told us, though, that you look at it from the standpoint of a reasonable officer under the same or similar circumstances and who has the same experience and training. Those were your words, right?
Yes. I believe that's the Supreme Court rule words, not mine.
Well, you use them.
I use them, yes.
When an officer is working, a single officer in a car, he's working a beat. Now, do you know how many people are in Ball Springs? Do you know how many population is in Ball Springs?
I did hear the number. I don't remember what it was.
Well, it's a very nice community. It has 25,000 people. It may have 3 or 4 officers on a beat at a time, maybe 5 sometimes. They work with certain areas, and then other officers from a contiguous area can come in and do backup. You understand that?
Yes, I do.
Do you understand that Officer Gross was the officer whose beat this incident occurred in?
I understand that it was a beat that he worked, yes.
And that when the call came out that there were a bunch of drunk teenagers walking up and down the street, that Gross and Oliver, as a backup, went to that facility.
That's correct.
And as you looked at the video for Officer Gross and Officer Oliver, would it be fair to say, and would you agree with me, that they were pretty pleasant guys in there?
I would agree with that, yes.
And they have, those were a lot of kids. Even the guy the young man whose house it was going, wow, we didn't mean this to happen.
That's correct.
150 really kids, young adults, having a party while mom and dad are out of town. But the approach for a street cop is to try to be pleasant, try to be firm, and try to move people around and do the things that he wants them to do. Correct?
I would agree with that.
And did you see that in both Gross and Oliver?
I did.
Did you see anything to make you believe that Oliver was mad that night or upset about anything?
No, I didn't see anything like that.
And then you agree with me that as you watched that tape, you heard 11 or 12 shots.
Yes.
And you're a trained officer, you're a combat veteran. You thought those were gunshots too, didn't you?
From reading the materials, things like that, I knew they were gunshots, and it sounded like gunshots, but it was all muffled, so it's really hard to say.
Well, what would you have thought if you heard it?
I would have probably thought it was gunfire.
And would you have thought it might be a automatic or semi-automatic weapon that fired those?
Well, definitely at least a semi-automatic weapon, yes.
And would you also believe that maybe we might have what's commonly now referred to, and we all know about, an active shooter?
That's possible, yes.
And were you aware that they had one or two shootings in that particular area before this incident occurred?
I was not aware of that.
Now, as a street cop, would you agree with me that they have to process all of this? Everything that they pick up, they put in their computer when they go on the street, correct?
That's correct.
And that's good policing, isn't it?
That's good policing.
You can say, gosh, I remember a month ago something else happened over here. Good for the community, good for the protection of the officer, correct?
I would agree with that, yes.
You didn't see these two guys just casually stroll out of that house when they heard that gunshot, did you?
No, they did not.
They went towards where they thought this semi-automatic weapon was firing.
That's correct.
Right? And you can say, looking at that film, that these officers knew that they had put all these young adults out in the street and moving towards where their cars were parked. So they actually had put a lot of young adults going in the direction of where they thought the fire came from, gunfire came from, correct?
I would agree that's a possibility, yes.
Would that make your heart beat a little faster if you thought we just pushed all of these young adults out into the street, told them to go get in their cars and go home, and then the gunfire is coming from that area?
It would make me concerned, yes.
Well, it make you concerned?
It would make me concerned, but as a police officer, I don't want to get overly concerned about something I know nothing about. I don't know what's going on. I thought I heard gunfire, so I'm concerned that something's going on up there, and I'm going to check.
And instead of going away from the gunfire, these two officers went right towards where they thought it happened.
That's correct.
Did you hear anyone on the tapes that you listened to tell this officer or Officer Gross, hey, the gunfire came from a yellow Tahoe up here? Did you hear anybody say that?
I heard chatter, but I could not define what they were saying.
Did you hear Gross say in his testimony that he thinks he heard somebody pointing at this car that this incident came out of?
I don't remember that, no.
Well, you didn't hear anybody telling these officers what they observed, and these were young adults that were out on the street right there. You didn't hear anybody telling them what they'd observed, did you?
What the young adults observed, or what did they observe?
What the young adults did. Hey, officers, the car up there on the hill, the Tahoe, yellow Tahoes, that's where those guys that were shooting the guns came from.
I'm saying, unless, I don't remember seeing that or hearing that.
Well, did you read anywhere where anybody made that report?
No, I don't remember seeing anything in there like that.
So the moment that Gross went out the door, would you agree with me that Oliver was the backup officer?
Officer Gross, he initiated the walking down there, and Oliver was going to be his backup, yes.
And can you help me understand what you train your FBI agents to do and other people that you say you train? What is the job of a backup officer?
Well, the training I did was with probably about 4,500 to 5,000 police officers of different types.
What did you
So it's
tell
not
them
what I
about
said, but that's what I actually did. And the question you're asking me is,
What do you instill in young cops or old cops about the duty of or what they can expect from a backup officer?
a backup officer is exactly what he's there for, is to make sure that the back of that, and that's why I say backup officer, the back of that other officer is protected. That whatever that officer is going into, that you're there to make sure that he's going to be safe. That's what you want to do as a backup officer.
So the backup officer, as far as you are concerned, is to protect and make sure that the lead officer is protected, correct?
That's one of the functions, but also a backup officer is also responsible for things within his environment right
I
there.
was just repeating what I thought you said. It's exactly what it says. A backup officer is there to protect the back of the lead officer.
That's one of the things he's here for, yes.
Okay. Well, from that scenario that you saw there, who was the backup officer for Oliver?
There was only 2 officers there.
Who was there to protect his back?
He was there by himself, if you want to look at it that way. He did not have somebody walking behind him protecting him.
Well, I'm only talking about the reality is that you had 2 officers that were in the street, correct?
That's correct.
They had no car or teach them to use the doors. I think today now is protection if you get into a situation. These officers were actually in the middle of the street under a street light, if I remember correctly.
They were in the middle of the street.
They were in a dangerous situation, don't you agree?
I would agree so.
They were very vulnerable.
Yes, they could have been, yes.
And if somebody was in fact shooting at the teenagers, they could have easily started shooting at the officers.
That would be correct.
Or if somebody was shooting out of that car that Officer Gross was trying to stop, they could very easily shoot Gross and Oliver.
If somebody was shooting out of their car, yes.
Well, would that be something that a well-trained officer might be thinking?
A well-trained officer, as you're going in, whether or not you're the lead or the backup, you're looking at that environment, as we said before, the eyes can see more than the camera. So you're looking at everything that's going on out there, trying to gather all that information. As you said, an officer is building that information on his past information.
Sure.
What can he what can he expect to happen? And so he's looking at everything out there. So it's just one aspect.
Did you take issue with Officer Oliver going and getting his patrol rifle?
No, I didn't.
And why is that?
I don't know what was in his mind, why he was doing it, but if you have a active shooting situation, having a long weapon would be a good thing to have.
Well, that'd be a smart thing to do because you can't, it's kind of hard to shoot people with a pistol when they're 100 yards away, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I could do it, so I don't know how hard.
Well, I guess I'm saying was everything that Oliver did, going to the vehicle, getting the patrol rifle, and moving as quickly as he could towards his partner, was that good police work?
That was fine, yes.
And do you have any objection to the way he took the weapon out and chambered around? I think their rules, their general orders say you don't keep a round in the chamber when it's in the vehicle.
That's correct.
And this weapon had a sling on it. Did you see at any point where he put it over his head and was carrying it with a sling?
I didn't see that, no.
Now, you're saying he had 9 seconds, you think, from the time he did what came up to where Oliver Gross was?
I believe it was 9 seconds at that, if I remember what Grant Frederick's report was saying. That's about 9 seconds.
During that period of time, would you agree with me, during that 9 seconds, from looking at that video, that there were at least 100 young adults out there, young women out there, screaming, coming all towards them while this was all going on?
I don't know if there was 100 or if there was 10. I don't know how many were out there. I could hear a lot of the sounds going on and people screaming.
Well,
but I don't know what they were saying.
If an officer runs into a situation like that with citizens that he's there to protect are running away from where gunshots have been fired and they're screaming and trying to get in cars and trying to get behind, would that raise an officer's level of apprehension as to what's going on?
Yes, it would.
Judge, can we take a break? Thank you.
This, if you would please go with the sheriff. All right for the jury.